Just moments ago, we all watched as Maduro and his wife left the detention center in Brooklyn. They're now en route to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Over the weekend, they were captured and brought to the U.S. after a military operation which took place on Saturday. They now face federal drug trafficking and weapons charges. Maduro has denied those allegations. President Trump is doubling down, saying the U.S. is, quote, in charge of Venezuela after the military operation. It's not entirely clear what that means, but Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says it means President Trump will set the terms.
Dealing with the people, we're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
Because we're in charge.
President Trump sets the terms. Ultimately, we're going to control what happens next because of this brave decision. President Trump has shown American leadership, and he'll be able to dictate where we go next.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the oil quarantine on Venezuela gives the U.S. leverage over what happens next there. He argues Venezuela's oil industry is backwards, but Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen told Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation President Trump is just trying to give billionaire donors a payday.
Those things are decrepit. They're bankrupt. They need to be reinvested in. It's obvious. They do not have the capability to bring up that industry again. They need investment from private companies who are only going to invest under certain guarantees and conditions.
This, from the beginning, has been about getting rid of Maduro, grabbing Venezuela's oil for American oil companies and Trump's billionaire buddies. That's what this is about.
President Trump is renewing calls for the U.S. to take over Greenland for defense purposes. Mr. Trump has frequently mentioned annexing the Danish territory. Denmark's prime minister is now strongly urging the U.S. to, quote, stop the threats. And we have a team of correspondents covering every angle of the Venezuela story. Matt Gutman on the left of your screen is at court in New York City awaiting Maduro's arraignment. But let's begin with Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, good morning to you. What might the future of Venezuela look like? We heard the U.S. president there say the U.S. is in charge, but he also said he's speaking with the country's new leader, Delcy Rodriguez, who was Maduro's number 2. So who really is in charge and what happens next?
Well, Errol, at this point, it depends on who you ask. And you're right that if that is President Trump, he is doubling down on the U.S. running Venezuela, although he has yet to offer many specifics, like for how long that would last and whether it would involve a U.S. military occupation. But, Errol, it is quite clear that the president wants America to play a significant role in reshaping the next chapter of Venezuela. And even though leading up to Maduro's capture, he was really stressing the efforts to counter narco-terrorism. There's a lot more now on the table because he has captured Maduro and is not contradicting the aim for regime change. And he is also focusing heavily on Venezuela's rich oil reserves, not making not trying to beat around the bush when it comes to the U.S.'s desire to correct and to operate the oil infrastructure, Errol, that he says is crumbling. So in terms of how that's all going to play out and how they are going to work with the current regime is unclear, because the president has issued threats to the current acting president of Venezuela, that is Delcy Rodriguez, who you mentioned. And initially, when Maduro was captured, she said, look, the only president of Venezuela is Maduro. But she has since softened that after hearing from President Trump saying that she ought to cooperate or else she could face consequences even worse than Maduro. And she now says that she invites the U.S. for collaboration and cooperation on the next steps in her country. Errol.
All right, Weijia Jiang with the latest at the White House. Thank you, Weijia. CBS News chief correspondent Matt Gutman joins us now live at the federal courthouse in New York City. Matt, this is your first appearance on CBS News 24/7. A warm welcome. The first of many appearances, and what a way to start. We just got a glimpse of Maduro on his way to where you are. It may be the only time we see him. What can we all expect from today?
We expect this to be the first major legal milestone. I mean, I think he's going to be brought around back. So the press arrayed here on the other side of the street of the federal courthouse are probably not going to see him until he is actually in court. And there he is expected to plead not guilty, he and his wife, to this slew of federal charges that they face that could net them decades in prison if convicted. In the meantime, he's been housed at one of the most notorious lockups in the country, and we can hear some of the helicopters in the air right now. I think those are news helicopters observing the other helicopter that is carrying Maduro come in. But he is being held in the meantime in one of the most notorious lockups in the country, along with other high-profile inmates like Luigi Mangione.
And we are seeing footage, Matt, of Maduro and his wife in an armored vehicle en route to the courthouse. So they've left the helicopter by now. Help our viewers understand what Venezuela is like. You have reported there extensively. You were detained by intelligence officials for several days in 2016. Help us understand how that experience explains how leaders in Venezuela operate.
You know, it's a very interesting question because it is a kleptocracy. And the reason, Errol, that we traveled there in 2016, along with a producer who I'm working with for the first time since then, Carlos Beltran, which is crazy. We had worked in Venezuela. We were captured together, and then we met each other for the first time 9 years and 2 months later, just yesterday, working on this story. But the reason we went there is to cover this kleptocracy. What the government did is essentially steal from everything. And one of the places that you could see the effects of this kleptocracy most starkly was in the hospitals. They took all the medication. You didn't have sutures there. There were no gowns. If you were shot, you had to provide your own sutures, your own medication, your own pain medication in order for the surgeons to actually operate on you. And so we had focused on a pediatric ward. A very courageous doctor took us through there to show us what happened to these children without this medication. The government was literally letting them die. And on our way out, the local militia basically pointed us out to the local police, who then took us in. And then we were taken in by the national police and then by the secret police, who eventually accused me of being a spy because in Venezuela, people are not allowed to report on the depravities in their own local hospitals because the government controls that. Eventually, now, we were not physically harmed in any way. We were deprived, we were harassed, we were threatened to be there for many years if we did not confess to be spies, which we were not. So that never happened. But we saw, literally right where we were sitting, there were people being held in conditions that were absolutely abysmal. The government has tortured many thousands of people, illegally detained many thousands for many years, and of course, killed people. And I think the big question that Maduro and, the prosecution here is going to face is, yes, it is universally known, Errol, that Nicolas Maduro is an autocrat, that he is terribly corrupt. The question is, does the federal government have specific evidence pointing to him being a kingpin of a drug cartel that specifically sent narcotics to the United States that killed people here? And that is really what's going to be in question in this courthouse over the next probably weeks and months, maybe even longer.
Yeah, today expected to be procedural, but just remarkable that all those years ago, while Nicolas Maduro was president and you were detained, you will now report on him from the outside during his arraignment. Matt, a warm welcome to CBS News. We'll see you much more in the hours and days ahead. And we will have a special report on Maduro's arraignment later today. The hearing itself is scheduled for noon Eastern there in that federal court. We'll bring you all the information from inside the courtroom as soon as we have it right here on CBS News 24/7. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano joins us now from Cucuta, Colombia. This is right next to the Venezuelan border with a reaction there to what's happening. Lilia, good morning to you. How is that part of the world responding to this seismic development?
Well, we are, Errol, just to give you a scene setter here, we are on the border between Colombia and Venezuela. As you remember, we were the only team of U.S. correspondents. Well, I was the only correspondent, and Walker here with me was the only producer from a U.S. network inside Venezuela during last year's election. This time around, we have not been allowed to go in. So as you can see, there are many cameras here, many crews trying to get into Venezuela to hear what things are like from inside the country. That said, we have been hearing from people coming in and out. And the reason why you're seeing these armored vehicles here is because whenever things collapse in Venezuela, when there is mass chaos, when there's the possibility of violence or mass migration, Colombia has to prepare. Last night, I was talking to the Minister of Defense, and he explained to me that one of the biggest concerns is that if, in fact, Venezuela starts tackling their organized crime over there, which hasn't happened at a great scale before, that violence and those people might spill over across the border and affect Colombia. Here's a little bit of what's happening inside Venezuela at this moment.
In Caracas, Venezuela's capital, residents rushed to the supermarket and lined up at pharmacies and gas stations, stocking up. There's anxiety and desperation, this woman says, and we don't know what will happen. Venezuela's future hinges on who will run the country and how, following nearly 3 decades of authoritarian rule by Nicolás Maduro and before him by the late Hugo Chávez. In Venezuela, supporters of Maduro's regime made it known. Our president is Nicolás Maduro, this protester says. The country's interim president is Delcy Rodriguez, a longtime leading figure of the regime. She was oil minister and has been Maduro's vice president since 2018. Nailin Peña is among millions of Venezuelans who fled the regime. She's in Colombia hoping to return, but is skeptical of Rodriguez.
Nothing's going to change, you think? Nada va a cambiar, Chris. No.
We were in Caracas during the last presidential election when the city erupted in protest against the regime, despite the opposition showing evidence that they won with nearly 70% of the vote. Maduro continued his reign. Peña is among the many Venezuelans abroad wondering why President Trump is negotiating with regime figures instead of supporting the opposition leader, María Corina Machado.
Respecto a la figura de María Corina Machado.
Todo el mundo vio lo que vio y todo el mundo vio lo que vio y resultados no fallan.
Everybody saw what happened, and the results are not wrong, meaning that it was the opposition who won the election. Over the weekend, President Trump said that María Corina Machado and the opposition don't have the support or the respect to run Venezuela. That caused a lot of frustration among the supporters of the opposition, but I've heard from Venezuelans who say, look, we're giving the Trump administration the benefit of the doubt in negotiating with the regime figures in power for the sake of stability. We're going to continue reporting here. As you can see, it started raining, but people are continuing to cross back and forth. It's a very dynamic border. Errol.
All right, Lilia, with that live reporting out of Colombia for us with all the latest. Lilia, we appreciate it for you and your team. Go and get dry. We'll see you again soon.